This evening, we're going to take a look at character categories. And I hope it's going to be fun. I think it will be fun. I've picked six particular categories. Obviously, I can't do all 14 in one night. We will be falling asleep here. But we will talk it through at what the examples are. And I've picked examples for specific reasons. I'll tell you when we get there. Some, like for instance, some adversary characters in major motion pictures are pretty obvious, right? And therefore, I picked one that isn't obvious, so you can see the other side of it too, okay? Now then, perspective. Eric does like the Greeks, doesn't he? What is character? In a screenplay or a novel. And they are both important because they are very different, and we'll get to that in a second. About 400 BC, what's his name? Theophrastus. Theophrastus was a Greek philosopher, and he sat down and made up this list. It was about, 70 types long, but made up a list of types of people based upon predominant attitudes: flatterer, garrulous, boor, reckless, superstitious, and so forth. I'm not quite sure why he did it, because he was a philosopher, not a dramatist. But it just turned out that one of his students was named Menander, and Menander, as some of you obviously, Menander went on to make a career out of writing somewhere around 100 comedy plays based upon these character types, using the types of people in exaggerated form to create comic characters. Menander basically was the first comedy writer, first playwright comedy writer in history, as far as we know. And he did quite well. He had a good career at it. But attitude types do not relate to plot function. And what we must concern ourselves with, and obviously as I eliminate other possibilities here, we're talking about plot function, and that is where we go to the 14 character categories. Early on, this was, Molière was doing this, almost 2,000 years later, using the types, the exaggerated types, all of which was swell, but the plots were not necessarily dependent upon those characters feeding into them. Okay. I just typed in character categories and Googled it, and this is what came back. This is contemporary. This is a few months ago. Round character, flat character, stock character, one-dimensional, three-dimensional. But again, this has nothing to do, and misses completely, story purpose. And that's what we're looking for, the story purpose of characters, because the storytelling function of a character in film is critical, is absolutely critical, even more critical than it is in novels, right? So every character present in your screenplays and scripts, other scripts, they have to be there to serve the plot, the story, and moving it forward. And there's only two ways that they can serve a story. They either are there to help or to hinder the progress of the hero. That's it. And let me tell you, this is why that is true, okay? And then we have to back up a bit. And I have had lots of students through the years who come in with attitudes towards story and character that they have learned from teachers and professors of English and of literature, and in other words, from novels. And the difference between novels and motion picture visual storytelling couldn't be more extreme and separate, absolutely separate. First of all, here is how a novel works. Number one, it is subjective. Subjective. It is always an interior monologue, which means there is a narrator writing it or talking it and talking to you, the reader. That makes it subjective. It is the opinion of one person, basically. And even when the story is written in third person or third person omniscient, like the voice of somebody looking down from heaven upon the scene and describing everything and then jumping from inside the head and feelings of one character to inside the head and feelings of another character, that too is completely subjective because some God is narrating it. 2, in writing, in novels, you've got sentences and paragraphs, and they can only focus on one thing at a time. One. A sentence describes the sunset and then describes the way the trees are blowing in the breeze or whatever it is, and then the next single thing gets addressed, one thing at a time. So what happens is, it only works in that the reader provides everything else from your own memories, your own, oh yeah, I remember, and then you kind of fill in the details and help create that fictional world of the novel in your own imagination. And that too is subjective. The whole process here of reading and enjoying a novel and experiencing that story is subjective. 3, novels can take side trips. They don't have to be read in one sitting. They can, and we'll try War and Peace. You're going to be having several sittings to get through it, yes. But that means there's less focus on plot. Not always, but in general, it is looser. It is looser. The whole plot thing is looser. Let me see. I was just thinking about Ernest Hemingway book, but For Whom the Bell Tolls. Anybody read it? Grand total of 1? Okay. I know, it's another era, of another era. I was a Hemingway fan when I was in my teens, and I compulsively read them all, kind of stuff. But For Whom the Bell Tolls is a really great book. But the main story is, it takes place in revolutionary Spain in the mid-30s, just before World War II. Francisco Franco, as a dictator, had taken over Spain, and the rebels were in the mountains fighting to return to democracy. And that's the main plot. But there is one character in it by the name of Pilar, a woman by the name of Pilar. As I recall, she's about 50 years old. I can't remember. That's the image that still, the subjective image that still stays with me all these years later, right? But she's taking all the risks of all the other people. She risks death every day when they go into battle and so forth. But Hemingway grew so fond of her that for almost 90 pages, he takes a sidestep and writes her entire story and her entire backstory. And it's wonderful. I mean, it's him writing prose, which is wonderful by definition. And then some 80 or 90 pages later, he comes back to the main plot and continues. You cannot do that in visual storytelling. That is a quality only available in novels, in literature form. You can't do that. Plot can be looser because it's not limited to 2 hours only and has to be seen in one sitting. Describes feelings and thoughts that, the narrator goes from inside the feelings and thoughts of one and describes them and describes the other. So we can subjectively know people's emotions. Okay, now here's the movies. Film is exactly the opposite. Visual storytelling is as utterly objective as novels are subjective. When we go into a theater and sit down and the movie begins, everybody in that audience sees exactly the same thing. Everybody. We don't bring our own imagination to it. We see the exact same thing. Everything has been decided. The set, the lighting, the costumes, the blocking, everything is taken care of and does not require our imagination to feed over it. And secondly, instead of one thing at a time, motion pictures give to us a deluge of information all at once. Hundreds of individual, there's motion and there's color and there's speech and there's action, physical action, and it's all happening at once. And that's why it's such an overwhelming art form. It is the most overwhelming and personally involving art form so far that there is in the world, because of this deluge of information. No side trips. You got approximately 2 hours to tell your story, beginning to end, and then everybody goes home. It's not done in small little bites like you would read a novel over time. It has to be complete in 2 hours, and that means no side trips, none. And because it is utterly objective, that means the only way we learn, really, about character is by what they do. Behavior in film is character. In novels, it can be described. We can go inside, and this and that is going on inside, and stuff. You can't do that. I'm not saying that there isn't dialogue and people can say, ouch, because they're feeling pain or something. But for us to know it and to share it, it has to be behavior which can be seen, three-dimensional, visual, and that is why when you build a story, a visual story, you are providing the plot that will allow your characters, but specifically your key character, to take this journey and demonstrate who they are and demonstrate how they grow and how they change by the end. That is very completely different, really, than novels. Okay. Therefore, all characters must serve the ends of, in that 2 hours, making that hero's journey, his or her trip through whatever your story is. They must feed into that, and they have to either help or hinder the hero. And simultaneously be providing conflict, visible, present tense conflict. So that's how we arrive at the 14 character categories. Now, you saw this last time. Here it is again. And I just want to run these past you one more time. These are in the book. These are in the book. Don't worry about that. But this is the first half of them. And tonight I've got examples of hero, adversary, love interest, sidekick, mentor, and endangered innocent. The Gate Guardian we will save. It's usually more of a lesser part than the others, and we'll save it for another time. And then these are the other 7. And these we will get to over time as we analyze the pictures that we're going to be looking at, right? Although I'll say off the top of my head, adversary agent is extremely important because most adversaries have help. And that help, the ones who do the bidding of and take the orders from, in one way or the other, the adversary, they are adversary agents. And there's various ramifications of who that can be, but that is the purpose, storytelling purpose they serve. And down here, it's not really last on the list in terms of importance at all. I don't know how it arrived down here. But the helper, follower, allies of the hero are people who do the same, but for the hero. Helper, followers, there's all kinds of different ones. Ocean's 11, that's a one-hero movie. Danny Ocean is the hero. He has a sidekick, Rusty, that's another category we're going to take a look at. And then he has his team, all those other guys, the terrific, smaller parts, but they are key to the enterprise, and they are all helper, follower, allies. Okay. Beyond the 14 characters, of course, you have atmosphere characters, the under fives or the extras. They don't really have a category. I haven't given them a category here because they do not serve a direct plot storytelling function. What they are, saying it crassly, I suppose, are props. They are there to make the world, they're there for verisimilitude, to make the world, this fictional world, for this particular story, feel real. And sometimes they have a few lines, the sassy waitress who, has a quick, cute quip and drops the bill, and we never see her again. She has no story function. It's just milieu, just to give it depth. And they don't advance the plot. And something else that's useful about having the character categories is once you assign a role to one of your characters and pick them out of, because all of these can provide subplots, all of them. Once you pick a particular individual and you paint them and create them and make them three-dimensional, and once they are in a category, they have to stay in that category. You can't change categories. Okay? When it happens, and I've seen it happen a few times, and it just destroys movies. What's it called? The Deep End? Anybody seen The Deep End? Tilda Swinton, I think, stars in it. Well, that alone tells you something. It starts out very interesting, and it's about Tilda Swinton, whose son, who is, late teens and applying to college, and something happens, and then all of a sudden it looks like it's going to ruin his entire life, and there's bad guys and gangsters trying to blackmail mom, and she's running around trying to fix it and set it all right. But a very strange thing happens at the midpoint of that movie, is mom just kind of gives up and falls in a frump, and one of the adversary agent characters who works for the bad guy at the midpoint decides to take up the flag of hero. And all of a sudden, the mantle of hero changes from her to someone else, and he is the one who goes forward and resolves the story, and it doesn't work. It eliminates the emotional connection we have with the characters. It's changing horses midstream, and psychologically for your audience, it just doesn't work.